I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. 100 years ago, a tragic day in New York. We'll take a look back at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
It's important that we look at that disaster and ask the questions, is there such workplace injustice today?
Plus, we'll introduce you to a woman who survived the fire and kept a big promise to God.
Frances just closed her eyes and made a promise to the Blessed Mother that if she could get out of this burning inferno, she would devote her life to God.
And it's an important office in this city of immigrants. Bishop DiMarzio goes into the deep about the Brooklyn Diocese Office of Migration.
New York is an immigrant city because over 25% of the people in New York are immigrants.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. 100 years ago today, the largest workplace disaster ever to occur in the country's history at the time happened right here in New York City. And it took the lives of 146 people, most of them immigrant women and teenage girls. It was the March 25th, 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, a day that continues to live in infamy and sparked a turning point for workers' rights in New York and the labor movement throughout the country. Workers were crammed shoulder to shoulder at their sewing machines on the 9th floor of the now Ash building in Greenwich Village. It's said that a match or a lit cigarette was tossed into a bin, and minutes later, the factory was just engulfed in flames. The building had few exits, and its existing exits had been bolted shut to keep the people from taking breaks during work. Now, from that horrific loss of life came many of the labor rights we take for granted today, including fire and safety regulations, child labor laws, and workmen's compensation. Earlier this week, St. John University's law school recently held a conference on workers' rights and the dignity of workers. Panelists took the time to commemorate the anniversary of that fateful fire, the tragedy, and the good that rose from the ashes.
100 years ago, New York City experienced the worst workplace disaster in the city's history prior to September 9th, 9/11. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, where 146 women and children, largely immigrants in oppressive working conditions, died.
The conditions were inhumane and dangerous, and between 1909 to 1911, the women joined forces organizing and seeking union representation from the ILGWU. The fire that broke out on March 25 was caused by bins of fabric scraps on the factory floor that caught fire by some working men who were smoking cigars and pipes near the bins.
They were surrounded by flammable materials. The workplace was extraordinarily crowded. The doors were literally locked so that the employer could rest assured that there would be no workers taking unauthorized breaks, and it was a disaster waiting to happen.
100 years ago, even the very concept of organizing a union in the workplace was considered to be the work of agitators, anarchists, socialists, communists, and it went on and on and on.
This particular event really was a watershed event in American history where, for the first time, it focused people's opinions and their thoughts on the fact that workers do deserve to be able to not only work and have a job, which is the goal of every worker, every immigrant, but also, that they have, and they should have the opportunity to have a safe job.
Getting back to my grandfather, his daughter, Rosaria, who was 14, she was not a machine operator. She was kind of somebody that ran from machine to machine, helping out. My grandmother, Katerina, was a sewing machine operator.
From the tragedy, just as in the years immediately after the fire, some 32 laws were changed protecting workers, especially workers in the garment industries. But it affected my life because I grew up without the aunts, and except for my mother, we really grew up without older women in our lives.
It does kind of disappoint me in the fact that we haven't advanced more, that the labor laws in New York, while they've been a tremendous improvement in the last 100 years, still don't really do enough to protect workers.
It's important that we look at that disaster and ask the questions, Is there such workplace injustice today? And what are the conditions under which people work today?
Safety for the people working in or visiting them should be the prime concern. On behalf of all 146 who perished in this terrible tragedy and their families who love them, I wish to thank all of you for keeping their memories alive. Thank you very much.
And we will have more on the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire later on in the show. Amid the tragedy on that day, a miraculous story of survival. But stay tuned. When Currents returns, the day's headlines: a new setback for a local pro-life pregnancy center, an act of vandalism you have to see to believe. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, how the church is making a difference in the city of immigrants. But first, let's have a look at today's headlines. Well, when it rains, it pours, at least for one pro-life pregnancy center here in New York. Less than a week after a bill placing new regulations on those centers was signed into law, the main office of EMC Frontline Pregnancy Centers was vandalized. EMC founder and president Chris Slattery says it is the second time the office, which is located in the South Bronx, has been vandalized in the last 12 months. Slattery says the vandals entered the office through the second floor window. They destroyed supplies and displays and tore up the ceiling, doors, and floor. He says more than $5,000 worth of equipment was stolen, and as he put it, the office was virtually destroyed. Now, that comes less than a week after Mayor Michael Bloomberg signed into law a bill that requires EMC and other pro-life pregnancy centers in the city to notify potential clients that they do not offer abortion or referrals to that service or artificial contraception. Yesterday, the American Center for Law and Justice filed suit on behalf of EMC, challenging the constitutionality of the law. Well, in other news from the area, the website Life News reporting that a student at New Jersey's Princeton Theological Seminary is being accused of racism after distributing material about abortion in the African American community. Students at the seminary told Channel 2 News that the materials first appeared back in November and then reappeared in February during Black History Month. They included flyers advertising screenings of the documentary Maafa 21, which claims that abortion is used as genocide in the African American community. Well, it is a bill that is the first of its kind in the U.S., a measure in Arizona to ban race and gender selective abortions, heading to Governor Jan Brewer's desk now. The bill makes it a felony for doctors or other medical professionals to perform abortions based on the race or gender of the unborn child. Those who violate it would face prison and the loss of their medical licenses. Bills to restrict abortion also advanced in 2 other states. Kansas's Senate approved a bill to ban abortions after 21 weeks. Idaho's Senate, meanwhile, passing a measure to ban abortions after 20 weeks. Well, meanwhile, in Colorado, a bill that would legalize same-sex civil unions has advanced. The state's Senate approved the measure, which would give unmarried couples the same rights as those who are married. That legislation now heads to Colorado's House. The state's Catholic Conference has been encouraging people to contact their legislators to urge them to oppose the bill. From Washington, U.S. bishops have reaffirmed their commitment to deal with priests who abuse children. In a statement, Bishops' Conference President Archbishop Timothy Dolan said, quote, "We remain especially firm in our commitment to remove permanently from public ministry any priest who committed such an intolerable offense," end quote. He highlighted efforts by bishops to implement policies to deal with sexual abuse of minors by clergy. He said that the progress made must continue and cannot be derailed. Well, meanwhile, there's a report out of Ireland that country's largest Catholic seminary is slated for closing after recommendations from Archbishop Dolan. The newspaper The Irish Catholic reports that Dolan will recommend to Pope Benedict that all seminarians be removed from Maynooth College. The president of that seminary, though, denying that report. He says that it's without foundation. Archbishop Dolan was put in charge of the apostolic visitations of Irish seminaries following reports of widespread abuse at Catholic institutions in Ireland. And on the anniversary of the murder of Archbishop Oscar Romero, bishops in this country took the opportunity to encourage legislators to learn from his example. Los Angeles Archbishop Jose Gomez, who chairs the Bishops' Committee on Migration, says Romero defended the rights of poor and marginalized people. Gomez urged President Obama and Congress to do the same by adopting comprehensive immigration reform. Earthquakes and tsunamis, are they a sign from God? Well, according to a new survey, most Americans do not think so. Only 4 in 10 people believe that natural disasters are signs from God. Even less, 30% believe they're a form of punishment. The survey was conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute in partnership with Religion News Service. Only 1/3 of Catholics surveyed believed that natural disasters were a sign from God. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents ahead. When we return, Bishop DiMarzio celebrates 40 years of Brooklyn's Office of Migration.
You know, it's so diverse, and yet there's a unity there, and I think that's really the Church of Brooklyn and Queens.
Welcome back. Well, Brooklyn is used to being called its share of names, I guess probably both good and bad. It is truly a borough of nicknames. Now, if you're a regular viewer of NET, you know that Brooklyn is known as the City of Churches. We even have an Emmy-nominated series here on the channel that goes by that same name. But did you also know that the borough is also called the City of Immigrants? And there's good reason for that, because according to recent data, close to 40% of Brooklyn's population is foreign-born. And 40 is kind of a magic number here, because this weekend the Diocese of Brooklyn's Office of Migration is celebrating its 40th anniversary. The office has been a beacon of support and assistance for people from at least 167 different countries who speak more than 80 languages. I had a chance to talk more about the Migration Office ahead of the 40th anniversary celebration with Bishop DiMarzio. That's the topic of this week's Into the Deep. Bishop DiMarzio, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. The Office of Migration here in the Brooklyn Diocese celebrating a big anniversary here coming up, 40 years of doing work in the diocese. So I guess my first question right out of the gate here is what have they been doing for 40 years?
Well, a lot of things. Basically, it's a unique office within the diocese. Started at a time when migration was basically becoming a peak issue again after the 1965 change of the law. We started seeing many, many immigrants come from all over the world. At that time, it was Monsignor Bevilacqua, who was chancellor, started the office, and it was unique in the sense that it took care of the pastoral and the social needs of immigrants, dealing with the organization of pastoral care, but also the social services, the legal services, and other services for immigrants.
Now, as Brooklyn has grown and changed over the years, and we know it has, especially here in the diocese, it's extremely diverse. How have the works and the needs of the Office of Migration changed?
It just expanded. It just got more complicated, more diverse. Clearly, it did keep pace with things. We're happy now. We've been able to assign a new priest to it, Father Patrick Keatings. He's going to be assistant to Monsignor Marino. One interesting thing I remember about the office, it was in existence about 2 years, and I was in Newark, and the Archbishop there asked me to start a migration office. So I came over to Brooklyn with the Chancellor of the diocese, and we met with Monsignor, then Bevilacqua, and his staff to find out how the office was organized, and we went back and replicated it in Newark. Wow. So the Newark office is a little bit younger, but it was a kind of a carbon copy of what happened in Brooklyn, and I didn't know someday I'd be back here, responsible for it. But it was a tremendous model that was well thought out, that kept things in a way that were very accessible to migrants and were meeting their needs. We have, the events we have each year, especially the Shining Star Dinner, where each individual apostolate is able to nominate somebody who's been very active in the apostolate, and we have a dinner. And that dinner is it's like the Pentecost event, because you see the whole diet. We have to have 2 dinners. Can't find a place big enough. Wow. So that, and everybody comes together, and it's just such amazing how they interact, and it's so diverse, and yet there's a unity there, and I think that's really the Church of Brooklyn and Queens.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great event. I remember covering that here on Currents. It was really, really great. Now, as Different issues keep coming up in regards to immigration across the country. You know, last year with Arizona, there was a bill that the bishops were heavily against there. There has been other legislation come up this year in other states. I know my home state of Georgia actually just recently, the legislature there passed sort of a similar bill to the one in Arizona. Yeah. What has the Office of Migration here in the Brooklyn Diocese been doing to kind of get the word out about the Catholic stance on immigration?
Yeah, the Migration Office has an advocacy component too. I'm very much involved with myself. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a major meeting here in New York City where Mayor Bloomberg came, gave a very good address on the contribution of immigrants to New York City, especially in New York State. I think these other states you see, I don't think we will see in New York the reaction that we've seen in other states, because migration here, everybody understands it to be a net benefit. We're used to it. We have a lot of immigrants, and we see a positive side of it. In other places, they're not as comfortable with it, and you've got the underlying prejudices, etc. So the Migration Office, through myself and through Monsignor Marino, we attend a lot of meetings and advocacy positions in the city. Hopefully, we're working with the universities in town to get the talent that has immigration expertise to bring it together to try to showcase what New York City is about as an immigrant city, because it really is. New York is an immigrant city because over 25% of the people in New York are immigrants. Yeah. So it's clearly a major difference.
When we say City of Immigrants, it's not just a catchy title.
That's right.
All right, well, Bishop DiMarzio, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
The City of Immigrants. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents ahead. Coming up, keeping a promise to God. A woman who survived a tragic fire dedicates her life to the church.
4 years later, she took her vows and she became a nun, Sister Mary Albertina, with the Palatine Sisters out in New Jersey.
Well, finally tonight, we've already heard about the tragic day 100 years ago, Manhattan's Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire. For the families who lost loved ones, the loss was even greater in its personal impact. We caught up with a man whose family experienced that loss, but their story is one with a silver lining and what just might be a miraculous tale of survival.
One of the stories I heard a lot when I was growing up was about the Triangle factory fire. My mother's aunt had been killed in the fire. She burned to death, and my mother was named in her honor. Now, it was a factory down in Greenwich Village, and the fire broke out just around closing time. In those days, they didn't have sprinklers in the building, and there's a lot of fabric around, which caught fire immediately. The entire place was surrounded by flames. All the fabric was burning, and smoke and choking and screaming. These panicked employees, they ran for the stairs, but all the doors were locked, except for one. So some of them went to the fire escape, but there was so much weight on the fire escape from these panicked women, the fire escape collapsed. The fire department ladders could only reach the 6th floor, and the victims are trapped on 9, 10, and 11. And most of the exit doors are chained. They're locked by the owners of the company for security reasons. Okay, so there's really no way out here. Also working at the factory was her aunt's sister, Frances, and their cousin Rose. Aunt Frances and her cousin Rosie made it to the elevator, but the elevator wasn't there. It had already gone down. So Rosie, in a panic, tried to slide down the elevator cable, as did a lot of other young girls there, and none of them made it. It was just impossible to do that. She lost her grip and she fell. Santina, the woman my mother was named after, she disappeared in the fire. They couldn't find her. In fact, she was on the missing list for a couple of days. There's a picture of her from the New York World, and of course they got her name wrong. They have her as Sophie Salemi. The bodies were set up at a temporary morgue so families could come and identify. There are a lot of women who they couldn't identify because they were so badly burned. So her mother remembered the night before the fire, she had sewn a small tear in some of Sophia's clothing, and she looked at the clothing of many of the bodies, and then she recognized the stitching and the repair that she herself had done, and that's how she realized it was her daughter, and she said, "That's my Sophia." Now, Frances couldn't find her sister Santina, so Frances, totally panicked in the smoke and the flames, she closed her eyes and made a sacred promise to the Blessed Mother that if she could survive the fire, she would devote her life to God. And the next thing she knew, she was safely out of harm's way. She's up on the roof being rescued, you know, with no recollection of how she got there. And 4 years later, she took her vows and she became a nun, Sister Mary Albertina, with the Palatine Sisters out in New Jersey. And she was with them till she died, many, many years later. But what's interesting is even though she was officially known as Sister Mary Albertina, everyone in the family just called her Sister Albertina. Whenever you hear the older relatives talk about that, oh yeah, Sister Albertina. We went to visit Sister Albertina. She gave the children toys. Well, in those days, Italian families, they were very, very religious. So I think in this particular case, their religion gave them the strength to overcome this, you know. And I think it also helped that the one who survived became a nun and devoted her life to God. That was very important to the family. And they always spoke of Sister Albertina with great respect. What a lot of people don't realize that in 1911, a tragedy of this magnitude had never happened before in New York City. Now it's mandatory to have sprinklers in a building. You can't lock the exit doors. All the factory workers in 1911 were trying to unionize. You know, some succeeded, some didn't. The Triangle factory didn't unionize. And none of the victims got much compensation. But the owners collected heavily on the insurance. The building is still there. It's owned by NYU today. And on the outside of the building is a small plaque that says something to the effect of, "This is the site of the Triangle Factory fire where 146 men and women lost their lives." And that includes 2 of my ancestors.
Sometimes so easy to forget what a difference such a tragedy makes, not only in the lives of people personally, but then, you know, the effect that it's had really on labor in this country ever since. All right, well, I've got something for you to do, all right? Confess. Does the thought of going to confession make you break out in a sweat? Maybe you'd rather have your molars poked than your conscience probed? Well, truth be told, confession is a lot less painful than a dental visit. It's also an important sacrament, especially now during this time of Lent. And to get people prepared to get penitential, the Diocese of Brooklyn, Rockville Center, and the Archdiocese of New York are all joining forces for the I Confess campaign. All you have to do, go to iconfess.com, where you can enter for your chance to win thousands of dollars in scholarship money. It's just as easy as confession now. Just submit a 1-minute video encouraging folks to go to confession on April 18th, also known as Reconciliation Day. Just go to iconfess.com. There's my video right there. iconfess.com for more information. It's a lot of fun, and you could win some scholarship money as well, so it's got a good purpose to it. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching us tonight. Have a great night and a great weekend.